what excites us is that we're actually seeing results. You can run optimized workloads on AWS and see that your carbon emissions drop by up to 99%. It's those types of data points. We're starting to hear from customers, we're starting to hear from industry partners that we are starting to really see the efficiency numbers and figures come back to go, yes, we are marching down the right path.
Welcome to Sustainability Leaders. I'm Michael Torrance, Chief Sustainability Officer at BMO. On this show, we will talk with leading sustainability practitioners from the corporate, investor, academic, and NGO communities to explore how this rapidly evolving field of sustainability is impacting global investment, business practices, and our world.
The views expressed here are those of the participants and not those of Bank of Montreal, its affiliates, or subsidiaries.
On today's show, we're speaking with Chris Walker, Director of Sustainability at Amazon Web Services. His responsibilities at Amazon include global sustainability program management, ESG reporting, and strategic data center programs, among many other things. Our conversation will cover some of the challenges and opportunities Chris and AWS are facing on the sustainability topic. Welcome to the show, Chris.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate you having me and excited to talk today.
So let's get started maybe just to learn a little bit about yourself. Can you tell me about your journey that brought you to this role at Amazon?
Sure. Yeah, it's certainly not a linear path by any means. I've been with AWS now for 12 years, and before I jumped into the sustainability role for about 5 years, I was inside of our data centers managing a large networking organization where I, over the course of 18 months, had about 40 people on a team, and it scaled to over 500 across 30 countries. I managed and built and scaled our entire AWS network within our data centers and built and scaled that network footprint in all of our data centers around the world, which kind of included purchasing, procuring, planning, and installing all of the cabling. In that role, I really started thinking more about circular economy and sustainability because, end of life, a lot of materials were coming out of the data centers, and we started thinking more and more about what we were doing with it, why we're doing what we were doing, and kind of what the broader picture around sustainability was, which led me to the role I'm in now. And so I started in this role in early 2023, and it was a role that I jumped into. It was initially more of the program management space, but over the course of about 9 months, it grew into beyond just sustainability program management. And I have sustainability program management for all of AWS. And what that means is I have folks that sit with and work alongside of our DC engineering teams, our services teams, our construction teams, our operations teams to really implement programs, but also help kind of think about what other programs we need to implement within those spaces. I have a science team that thinks very theoretical, but also very practical about the methodologies of goals we're taking, looks into the methodologies and the data sets that we're using to measure our carbon footprint. I also have a software development team within my organization that manages, among many other things, renewable energy tools or water tools and dashboards, but we also build and operate the customer carbon footprint tool, which shows customers their carbon emissions on our site. And then I have, you mentioned earlier, I have a customer engagement and kind of a reporting function as well, where we sit with customers, but also look at the regulations that are coming down the pike to make sure that we are, as a company, both ready to report out on, but also make sure we have the right level of granularity to continue to function in that fashion. So it's exciting. It's a massive role, and I'm grateful to be where I'm at today.
That's a really interesting journey, Chris. You've described the organization and you talked about several focus areas, everything from nature-related impacts, emissions management, product life cycle. Could you maybe just step back a bit and help describe Amazon's vision around sustainability? Like, what's the strategic priority? Are there certain key programs that you're focused on?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's important to kind of call out the distinction between Amazon and AWS too, right? And I think you have the ultimate Amazon company, which is our larger company. AWS is one of the business units that kind of falls within the Amazon umbrella. And we operate as a single company, but AWS's business is different than, say, Prime Video or our devices business. And so the programs and the space that we operate in as AWS is a bit different. I report into our infrastructure leaders, which means, my team is embedded within the business. It differs a little bit as you look across the Amazon umbrella. To your point about the priorities, in 2019, Amazon set and co-founded the Climate Pledge with Global Optimism. And part of that commitment was we commit to be net zero carbon by 2040. And so that commitment then kind of set a handful of different initiatives and goals. And, for AWS's business, obviously you can think about how that interacts with our business, but it is largely energy focused, at least initially it is. And we're starting to think beyond scope 2 and emissions right now. But for us, it really started with in 2019 when that goal was set. How do we start thinking about scope 2? How do we start thinking about renewable energy and ultimately carbon free energy? And beyond that. And so we have our top energy goal, which we originally set in 2030, which was to match 100% of our electricity used by renewable energy. We actually achieved that 7 years ahead of time. Beyond our energy goals, we have our water positive goal in 2030, which is where we aim to be returning more water to the communities in which we're operating in by 2030. And we're already over 41% of the way there as of today. And then we have a handful of other goals as well, but I think those are the kind of North Star goals that you have net zero carbon by 2040. You have 100% renewable energy by 2030, which we achieved in 2023, and then water positive by 2030 as well.
That's amazing. That's a lot of big priorities. Data centers are, of course, core to the business of AWS. They're well known to be quite energy intensive. And I think as we move into the world of AI and all sorts of very energy intensive computing, it'll become even more so. So you've set a very ambitious goal around net zero by 2040. What kind of innovations are you pursuing to reduce emissions related impacts of the data centers?
Yeah, there's a handful of ways we're thinking about this. And I think the top way is when you look across our data center space, whether it's designing, constructing, operating, and then the stuff that goes into our data centers, it all evolves and revolves around efficiency. How efficient can we get our data centers? How efficient can we maintain and operate our data centers? And when you think about it, data center efficiency, there's a term called power usage effectiveness, or PUE, and that's kind of different companies apply this rating to their data centers. 1.00 or 1.0 is considered a perfectly efficient data center. And most data centers are between 1.2 and 1.4. And so there's obviously some work to be done. In 2023, our data centers were right around 1.15 on a global level. And our best performing data center was around 1.04. We are continuing to evolve how we think about our efficiency and how we think about our space. In late last year, we rolled out some new data center components that really started lowering how we think about our efficiency within our space. And it's ultimately will lower our PUE in those data centers down to 1.08 on a global level. And a few of the things that we rolled out were, first, the design reduced the mechanical energy consumption by up to 46% during peak conditions. That's important to call out because in combination of lowering the mechanical energy use, we're also not increasing water usage. So we're using a more efficient cooling system within our sites while lowering the energy usage with that cooling system. The second thing is through the materials that we're using to build the data centers, we're reducing the embodied carbon of our data centers, the shell, by up to 35% as compared to the industry average. And so we're using lower carbon concrete, lower carbon steel to then stand up the physical building itself. And then beyond that, we are utilizing hydrotreated vegetable oil, or HVO, to run our backup generators on, which is going to continue to lower our GHG emissions at a faster rate as well. What's exciting about those components and some of the innovations that we're rolling out is we're seeing that while offering up to 12% more compute power to our customers. And so we're continuing to increase the efficiency, but while increasing the compute power for the customers, which is an exciting kind of feat. Usually those are at odds with each other.
I've been watching with a lot of interest in some of the significant investments AWS has made in nuclear power, and nuclear seems to be making a comeback in terms of being viewed as a source of clean power. Can you share what went into the decision-making by AWS on that investment, and how do you weigh the costs of that versus the benefits it provides?
The way we think about nuclear is it's one of the tools we think of in the carbon-free energy portfolio. And, since 2019 and up until this point, we've been the largest corporate purchaser of renewable energy for 5 years in a row. We're going to continue to invest in the renewable energy space. And we've supported now I think it's more than 600 solar and wind projects globally, which is enough to power something along the lines of like over 8 million homes or something like that. But that's the scale we're operating at. And when we started looking at customer demands, the demand of the electricity grids within the US and in other regions, we really started thinking about what other tools do we need to add to that belt to allow for us to have a consistent level of highly available power. That's where nuclear came into play. we started looking at different types of nuclear, different types of investments, and I think we certainly don't have it all figured out, but based on customer demand, and that's kind of how we operate and scale our business, is the demand that we see coming from our customers. We have to figure out ways to continue to meet that ultimate demand. Nuclear power is the path for us, given how significant nuclear power can offer, but also how available it is and how consistent it is, right? Renewable energy, just by sheer definition, is a variable source of energy, right? So when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, power isn't being generated as much. And so for you to continue to see the right amount of availability through those, you have to power them and pair them with battery storage systems, which at the scale we need it at, it just doesn't make sense yet. And so nuclear came into play. We made a handful of investments. Probably the top three investments were around the small modular reactor space. Two of the investments were with two different utility companies, one here in Virginia, which is Dominion Energy, and we signed an agreement with them to explore the development of SMR projects close to the North Anna nuclear station right now. It'll bring up to 300 megawatts or so of power to the Virginia region, but we're also seeing, and Dominion kind of shared with us, they're seeing an increase of up to 85% in this region over the next 15 years. And so I think we're working with them to continue to find ways of scaling SMRs and the nuclear technologies in that space. In the Pacific Northwest, we've partnered with Energy Northwest, which is a consortium of state public utilities. And we're looking to enable the development of up to 4 advanced small modular reactors up in the Pacific Northwest. And these reactors will be constructed, owned, and operated by Energy Northwest, but they're expected to generate up to 320 megawatts of capacity for the first phase and likely scaling up to 3 times that, so 960 megawatts. And so that kind of works in the 2 different corners of the country where we have larger collections of data centers. And then beyond the utility investments, we really started thinking about technology, and we wanted to make sure that we're thinking holistically about it. And that's why we partnered with X-Energy, which is a leading developer in the next generation SMR, both reactors and the fuel sources. And X-Energy's advanced nuclear reactor will be used up in the Energy Northwest project. And then this investment that we gave them includes manufacturing capacity for the SMR project, but also to help bring at least 5 gigawatts of new nuclear projects using X-Energy's technology. And when you think about the nuclear space and getting that space going, or that energy going, if you will, no pun intended, it's really around figuring out ways to get the supply chain going. And I think that's where we've been really intentional around, is making sure that both the labor force is there, the technology is there, and the fuel sources are there to make sure that this technology can not only scale for us, but also for the society as a whole.
So Chris, when you're thinking long term, do you guys have a roadmap about how you're going to meet your growing energy needs? You mentioned, for example, there's obviously a lot of focus on nuclear SMRs, but you mentioned batteries, batteries not being ready right now. But do you have a vision as to how technology will be evolving over the next 5, 10, 20 years and what your energy supply mix is going to look like?
We have an idea. We certainly are committed to enabling all sorts of energy, whether it's renewable energy, nuclear energy, battery storage, to meet, the ultimate goal of net zero carbon by 2040. And I think, I mentioned kind of battery storage. We are investing in utility scale battery solutions to store carbon-free energy, renewable energy that's produced by our solar projects. We're continuing to look at additional energy sources throughout nuclear, and there's different types of nuclear, right? Fusion, fissions. There's a handful of other fuel sources that are being mentioned, and so I think we are certainly looking at all viable sources of carbon-free energy. And we need to make sure that, not just for the data centers, but also for the broader industry, US, I sit here in the East Coast, but, all sources of carbon-free energy need to be considered when looking at decarbonizing for our business, for broader society as well. And we're going to continue to look at all the options above board, whether it's nuclear, renewable, and everything in between.
And when you're thinking about procuring clean energy over long periods of time, what are some of the challenges or opportunities that you've seen in doing this in practice that maybe other sustainability professionals could learn from?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think first and foremost, measure your carbon emissions, measure your footprint, because I think that helps kind of give you the idea of scale that you should be thinking about. Understanding the demand, understanding your carbon emissions and your footprint, that is first and foremost. And so I think before you jump into renewable energy procurement, it helps to at least measure and get some of the data to back it up. Beyond that, I think it's really looking at starting at the local level where companies and leaders and businesses are operating at, look at different ways that you can invest. Local projects, we do this both in renewable energy space, but also on our water space, starting at the hyper local level and looking for partners on the ground to both scale and invest in. That's where you should probably start and then kind of work outwards from there. Beyond that, we opened up the Amazon Sustainability Exchange earlier this year, which was we started thinking about how can we help kind of scale some of the lessons learned and some of the, whether it's science models or other resources or playbooks that we've used at the Amazon level and also the AWS level. And I think that's one of those, it's a resource that I would urge everybody to take a look at. It's publicly available. It has previously proprietary information that we held within the Amazon space, but I think it also helped kind of that flywheel of learning and feedback and lessons learned for companies really to start making meaningful progress towards net zero. And then beyond that, I think one of the most important things, whether it's looking at procuring long-term sources or thinking about your own sustainability journey, set a goal. And it may be ambitious. It may be, again, match your 100% energy with renewable energy by X date. But think about that. It always helps to set a goal and kind of work backwards from there. And I think that's one of those things where some companies are somewhat hesitant on doing so. But I also think it helps setting a goalpost to make sure that, it helps rally companies around and it helps think practically about how they would get to certain goals as well.
The Sustainability Exchange initiative, that was something actually I heard the Amazon Chief Sustainability Officer talk about, and it was one of the reasons I was really interested to talk to you all. Are there any anecdotes or things that you guys have put in there that stand out to you that really show some of the things that you've done to try to overcome challenges and innovate?
Yeah, there's probably the one that's dearest to my heart is around PUE and some of our methodologies that we've rolled out there. And, it's taken hours, hundreds, thousands of hours of engineers and researchers and scientists that we've either outsourced or insourced to really think about methodologies and data boundaries around there. And I think when you start thinking about measurements, thinking about carbon counting practices or efficiency practices, we've learned a lot. And we've learned a lot over the course of 6, 7, 8, 10 years. I think PUE and the methodology and how we think about that methodology, how we think about the boundary of the PUE methodology that we apply. I think that's one of those resources. We've heard from a handful of customers already that it helps give them an idea of more of an apples to apples comparison within the industry, but also helps them think about how they should be thinking about their own sources of efficiency and how they use certain types of either energy or other resources as well. So I think that's one piece. I think there's a handful of others as well, but I think certainly the one that jumps to mind.
Very good. And your mandate's quite broad. We've talked a lot about clean energy and energy sourcing, but I think your mandate includes things like reporting and related to the sustainability strategy. There's a lot of change happening, and I find this with my role as well. You got to really stay focused and understand what's really important to the business. What are some of the things that you're really motivated about and see as the North Star that you're working towards?
Honestly, I think the thing that motivates me and my team on a day in and day out basis is the challenge. I mean, you mentioned it, right? This space is ever evolving. Pick a dynamic, whether it's regulatory, customer demands, administrations, pick one of those dynamics. It's changing, and it's changing the space that we are operating in on a daily or hourly basis. That challenge gets us excited. It rallies smart folks around me. I get excited around building teams. I'm humble enough to know that I don't know everything. And so I make sure that I find and hire the right people to kind of rally around these challenges. I think what excites us is that we're actually seeing results. The challenge is exciting. Seeing the results and the data is that much more exciting. The approach that we're taking around efficiency and how we're using the water and the energy that we're using, we're starting to really see some data come back around how AWS is 4.1 times more energy efficient than on-premise data centers. You can run optimized workloads on AWS and see that your carbon emissions drop by up to 99%. It's those types of data points. We're starting to hear from customers. We're starting to hear from industry partners that not just the materials that we're using to build the data centers, how we think about and operate our data centers, but even down to the chip level. We are starting to really see the efficiency numbers and figures come back to go, yes, we are marching down the right path. I think the other challenge is we also know we don't have it all fixed. We don't have it all solved yet. There is so much more to go do. And I think the one area, scope 2 emissions and renewable energy that we've really made some intentional investments around, we're seeing the fruit of that labor. But kind of looking beyond that, Scope 3 is the unicorn of problems. It is, if you ask anybody leading a sustainability organization within any company, if they've figured out Scope 3, I would love to talk to them because it's the problem of problems that everybody's trying to solve right now. And it's exciting.
That is very exciting, Chris, and thanks for sharing that. So, Chris, you've talked about your own sustainability goals at AWS, but can you talk a little bit about the context of your own goals and how they are related to maybe market demand and meeting your clients' expectations or even helping them achieve their own sustainability objectives?
It's a good question because it kind of speaks to both the progress we're making, but also some of the motivation. And I think, AWS and Amazon, you read through our leadership principles or any of the materials around our company, we are always touting how we're a customer-obsessed company. We start with the customer and kind of work backwards. And I think my organization is unique in the sense, especially kind of sitting within infrastructure, because I sit down with customers, probably half of my weeks are meeting with customers, talking about their goals, talking about our journey, talking about their journey, and thinking through more what they can do, but also what more they can learn. And I think it's important to think about, and this is what's always interesting, is customers, supply chain partners, and people across various industries, they're at different levels of maturity. And what I mean by that is you'll have some companies that have big, lofty, ambitious goals. They have sustainability teams and carbon accounting teams, and they're really thinking very deeply about the problem, and they've set those goal markers and are really, holding folks accountable. They're setting targets and thinking both practically, but also strategically around sustainability. You also have customers and partners and supply chain partners that aren't, and it's everything in between. And I think it creates an interesting problem for us because we then have to think about, okay, what can we do on our side to help them even think about their journey or think about the goals that they're taking? And so I think framing it that way is always interesting because not everybody's in the same boat. Not everybody's on the same page. They don't have the same size team or the same investments or resources in the space. But I think what's exciting for us is we get regular feedback. I've cut quarterly customer roundtables where we have a large group of customers that come in and air out feedback on whether the tools that they're using or seeing on our side are helpful, whether our goals that we're setting or talking publicly about are helpful. We hear from them. Some customers have 2030 goals, which is 10 years ahead of our original goal, right? Or of our 2040 goal, which creates some interesting dynamics around how we're thinking about, decarbonizing our supply chain or our Scope 3 emissions or our Scope 2 emissions. So it comes down to making sure that you're having above board conversations. And I think beyond that, Michael, one of the things that we've really learned from our customers is transparency is penultimate. They want to hear about what you're doing. They want to see the data. They want to be taken on the journey with you. It's not something where we should continue to kind of hide it and be secretive about. This space, more than any that I've operated in, at least, customers appreciate transparency at every level. Transparency around things that we do know, transparency around things that we don't know, transparency around data points that we are proud about, and transparency around data points that we may not be so proud about. And so I think that's something we're continuing to navigate within, our leadership chain, is how do we get our leadership and overarching and Amazon in general comfortable with disclosing maybe a bit more than we have in the past, because that ultimately helps our customers in general, whether they're looking for more data for regulatory purposes, whether they're looking for more data for their own sustainability goals or journey, whatever the use is. I think transparency is key.
Thank you so much for your time today. Are there any final thoughts that you want to leave with our listeners?
Yeah, I think beyond the excitement around net zero carbon and how we get to that point ultimately, I want to touch on water really quick because I feel like energy gets a lot of the sustainability airtime, but water positivity and the water space, when we think about hyper local problems that we're seeing within the communities that we operate in, water is one of those things that pops up in a bunch of different regions. And when we were scaling our data centers, we set a goal to be water positive by 2030. I mentioned that earlier. We're more than 41% of the way there. But what's more exciting is we are looking at running our operations by continuing to reduce the amount of water that we use to cool our data centers. Years ago, we started cooling our data centers using free air cooling or direct air cooling. And in certain parts of the world, we're already using just for direct cooling, using outside air. We're not even using cooling systems within the data centers. And we're continuing to look at scaling that. The amount of water, we're looking at returning up to 7 billion liters across 23 different projects on a global level. That's not a small scale. And that's exciting to be able to think about how we're partnering with farmers in local areas to give them irrigation water, how we're partnering with different investments and partners at a hyper-local area to replenish the water sources and use more sustainable water sources in those areas. And so beyond that, I can't be more excited to be in the position I'm in at the scale we're operating at. I feel like we're really making some change within the industry, and I appreciate the time today, Michael.
Thanks, Chris, and great work, and good luck with all of the initiatives you're pursuing. Thanks for your time.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to Sustainability Leaders. This podcast is presented by BMO. You can find our show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. Press the follow button if you want to get notified when new episodes are published. We value your input, so please leave a rating, review, and any feedback that you might have, or visit us at bmo.com/sustainability leaders. Our show and resources are produced with support from BMO's marketing team and Puddle Creative. Until next time, thanks for listening, and have a great week.
For BMO disclosures, please visit bmocm.com/podcast/disclaimer.